My daughter-in-law called me selfish, controlling, and pathetic at my own son's funeral. The next morning, she changed the locks and threw my belongings on the lawn. "All of those are your belongings. Get out." That's what the note taped to my front door said when I woke up at 7 in the morning to find every single lock changed and my entire life scattered across the front lawn in garbage bags. 72 years old, standing there in my bathrobe and slippers, staring at my clothes, my photographs, my medications thrown out like worthless trash. But what this manipulative daughter-in-law didn't know was that my dying son had been secretly planning the ultimate revenge for months. When that manila envelope arrived at her doorstep, she discovered that Gilbert knew exactly who she really was all along, and karma was about to hit harder than she ever imagined. My name is Margaret Henderson. I'm 72 years old, and I thought I'd seen every kind of cruelty this world had to offer. I buried my husband, Robert, 8 years ago, survived financial hardship that would break most people, endured the loneliness that comes with losing your life partner, and spent 6 agonizing months watching my only son Gilbert waste away from pancreatic cancer. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the moment Sarah looked me in the eye at my son's funeral and told me I was nothing but a burden he was finally free from. 3 years ago, when Gilbert married Sarah, I genuinely believed I was gaining a daughter. Here I was, a retired elementary school teacher, living alone in my little house on Maple Street, and when they bought the property directly behind me with the guest cottage, it felt like divine intervention. Sarah seemed absolutely perfect. Successful marketing executive, beautiful in that effortless way some women are, charming enough to light up any room she entered. She'd bring me flowers from her garden and ask about my day like she actually cared about the answer. The property they found needed extensive renovation, and the asking price was steep. $450,000 for the main house and guest cottage combined. That's when Sarah came to me with what seemed like the perfect solution for everyone involved. "We can't quite afford everything we want to do with the renovations, but if you wanted to invest in the property with us, we could make this work beautifully. You could live in the guest cottage, be right here with us like a real family, and when we eventually sell, you'd get a return on your investment." I didn't hesitate for even a second. The $180,000 from Robert's life insurance policy had been sitting in savings for 3 years, earning practically nothing. This felt like a way to help my son build his dream while securing my own future. We shook hands over coffee and my homemade apple pie, and I truly believed we were becoming partners, becoming a real family. The next 2 years were honestly the happiest I'd had since losing Robert. I lived in my cozy little cottage, but most evenings I'd join Gilbert and Sarah for dinner in the main house. We'd cook together, watch movies, talk about everything and nothing. It felt like we were building something beautiful, something lasting. But there were small moments that should have warned me. The way Sarah's smile would falter just slightly when Gilbert thanked me for something. Little jokes about having a live-in mother-in-law that felt too pointed, too sharp. How she'd redirect conversation when Gilbert mentioned my financial contribution to the renovation. I told myself I was being oversensitive, that these were normal adjustments to family dynamics. When Gilbert got his diagnosis 6 months ago, everything changed overnight. Sarah's mask started slipping, but so gradually I almost didn't notice at first. The little comments about how I was too involved in their marriage. The way she'd roll her eyes when I offered to help with medical appointments or research treatment options. The passive-aggressive remarks about my outdated opinions whenever I suggested different doctors or alternative treatments. But I ignored every single red flag because my son was dying, and I couldn't bear the thought that the woman he loved might not actually love him back. I was so focused on trying to save Gilbert's life that I didn't see Sarah was already planning her life without him. The $180,000 I'd invested? She started calling it a generous gift instead of the investment partnership we'd agreed on. The guest cottage I'd been living in for 2 years? Suddenly, it was temporary housing she'd graciously provided out of the goodness of her heart. Every sacrifice I'd made, every dollar I'd contributed, every sleepless night I'd spent caring for my dying son, she was systematically rewriting the story to make herself the victim and me the intruder. Sarah suggested I move from the cottage into the main house to help care for Gilbert. It would be so much easier if you were right here during the difficult times. It seemed loving, reasonable, the kind of thing a caring daughter-in-law would suggest. But living in the same house revealed sides of Sarah I'd never seen before. The way she'd snap at Gilbert when she thought I wasn't listening. How she'd complain about the smell of his medications, the inconvenience of his treatment schedule, the way his illness was affecting her work, her social life, her carefully planned future. I feel like I'm losing my husband and my life at the same time. I'm 31 years old, and I spend my days dealing with insurance companies and hospice nurses instead of actually living. Sarah began making comments about my involvement that sounded loving on the surface, but felt like criticism underneath. "You're such a devoted mother, Margaret. Sometimes I think Gilbert feels guilty that you're sacrificing so much for his care. Maybe you should take some breaks, do something for yourself." The hospice nurses think too many caregivers can be confusing for patients. They recommend having one primary caregiver to maintain consistency. Suddenly, I was being positioned as the well-meaning but overwhelming mother, instead of the devoted caregiver I actually was. The morning everything changed was 3 weeks before Gilbert died. Sarah had gone to the pharmacy to pick up his pain medications, and Gilbert called me to his bedside. His voice was weak, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been in days. "Mom, I need to tell you something important about the house papers. Sarah doesn't know I created additional documents that protect your investment. If anything happens to me, if she tries to claim you have no legal rights, there are papers hidden in Tom's office that prove otherwise." The front door slammed. I'm back. Traffic was horrible, but I got everything on the list. Gilbert's expression changed instantly, becoming closed off and tired again. When Sarah entered the bedroom, she immediately noticed the tension in the air. "What's wrong? You both look like you've seen a ghost." "Nothing's wrong. Just telling Mom how grateful I am for everything she's done." But I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before. A warning, maybe, or a promise. He squeezed my hand briefly, and I knew he'd been trying to tell me something crucial, something Sarah absolutely could not know about. Over the next few days, I noticed Gilbert trying to get me alone several more times, but Sarah seemed to develop an uncanny ability to interrupt these moments. She'd return from errands unexpectedly, or suddenly need to discuss something urgent with the hospice nurse, precisely when Gilbert started to confide in me. The funeral planning was the final insult before the real cruelty began. Sarah made every decision without consulting me. The service location, the music selection, who would be allowed to speak, even what Gilbert would be wearing in his casket. When I tried to contribute ideas or share memories I thought should be included, she'd cut me off. Gilbert and I discussed all of this in detail before he got too sick. This is exactly what he wanted. The cruelest part was the obituary. In Sarah's version, Gilbert was survived by his devoted wife Sarah and his mother Margaret, not beloved mother or loving mother. Just his mother, like I was an afterthought, a minor character in the story of his life. The day before the funeral, I asked Sarah if I could say something during the service. Just a few words about the boy Gilbert had been, the man he'd become, how proud I was to be his mother. "I think it's better if we keep the service simple and dignified. Gilbert wouldn't want anything too emotional or lengthy. You can share your memories privately with your family afterward." But there was no family afterward. There was no private gathering, no intimate moment to grieve together. After the funeral, Sarah cornered me in the funeral home kitchen and showed me who she really was. "Margaret, I need to be completely honest with you about something Gilbert told me before he died. He felt suffocated by your constant presence during his illness. He asked me to tell you after the funeral that it was time for you to build your own life instead of trying to live through his." The words hit me like physical blows. "You're selfish, controlling, and pathetic. You've spent the last 6 months making Gilbert's death about you instead of supporting his wife through the worst time of her life. Tomorrow morning, I want you completely out of the house. Pack your things and go back to your cottage. Gilbert left everything to me, and I don't owe you anything. The next morning, I woke up in what I thought was my home to find every single lock had been changed during the night. My clothes, my photographs, my medications, my most precious possessions, everything thrown into garbage bags on the front lawn like I was nothing more than trash to be disposed of. 72 years old, and I was homeless. My neighbors watched from their windows as I stood there in my bathrobe, holding Sarah's cruel note. The house was always ours. Your room was a charity we no longer choose to provide. When I called her, begging to just talk, to work something out like reasonable adults, her response was ice cold. I never want to see you again, Margaret. Gilbert left everything to me legally, and I don't owe you a single thing. Don't contact me again. The line went dead, and I stood there in that motel parking lot, staring at my phone in complete disbelief, a 72-year-old woman with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. I had driven around for hours after finding my belongings on the lawn, finally stopping at the first place I could afford. The Sunset Motel on Highway 441 charges $49 a night for a room that smells like cigarettes and crushed dreams. Sitting on that sagging mattress with my one suitcase, I took inventory of what 72 years of life had left me with. 3 changes of clothes, my daily medications, $47 in cash, and a checking account with exactly $1,847. I called my sister Ruth in Phoenix. Gilbert died last week. The words came out in a rush, then I broke down completely, telling her about the changed locks, the garbage bags, the cruel accusations, the $180,000 that had vanished like it never existed. Instead of the sympathy I desperately needed, Ruth was quiet for a long time. Margaret, honey, are you absolutely sure you're remembering everything correctly? Grief can make us interpret situations differently than they actually happened. Maybe Sarah is just overwhelmed with everything, and you can work this out when emotions settle down. Even my own sister thought I was being dramatic, making up stories, not thinking clearly in my grief. That's when I realized how completely Sarah had won. She'd positioned herself as the reasonable, grieving widow, while painting me as the unstable, demanding mother-in-law who couldn't accept reality. I called my friend Helen from my teaching days, hoping for different support. Her response was heartbreakingly similar. Maybe this is for the best, Margaret. You were becoming so isolated, not building any life of your own. Maybe Sarah is actually giving you a chance to find independence again, to rediscover who you are outside of being Gilbert's mother. Nobody understood that this was about theft, manipulation, and deliberate cruelty. Everyone thought this was about me needing to accept my son's death and gracefully move on with my life. The turning point came from the most unexpected source. Gilbert's business partner Tom Brennan called me on my 4th morning at that depressing motel. "Mrs. Henderson? I hope I'm not disturbing you, but I need to speak with you about Gilbert. It's extremely important. Gilbert made me promise to wait until after the funeral, but there are things you need to know. Things Sarah doesn't know I know. Can you meet me tomorrow morning at 10? That entire night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Gilbert's strange behavior during his final weeks. His insistence on going to the office when he could barely walk, his obsession with organizing paperwork, the secretive phone calls he'd make when Sarah left the room, the urgency in his voice when he'd tried to tell me about those house papers. I arrived at Tom's office 30 minutes early. The building housed Henderson and Brennan Design, and seeing Gilbert's name still on the sign brought fresh tears, but also a strange sense of determination I hadn't felt in weeks. Tom looked like he hadn't slept properly in months. "Mrs. Henderson, before we begin, I need to apologize to you. Gilbert asked me to do something that went against every instinct I had as his friend and business partner, and I'm still not sure I made the right choice by honoring his request." He pulled out a thick manila envelope from his desk drawer, legal-sized, with my name written across the front in Gilbert's unmistakable handwriting. Below my name, in smaller letters, "For Mom, in case Sarah shows her true colors." Gilbert came to this office exactly 2 weeks before he died, He was so weak he could barely walk from the parking lot, but he absolutely insisted on coming alone. He told Sarah he had final business matters to handle, partnership documents that needed his signature. But that wasn't why he came. Tom's voice cracked with emotion. Gilbert spent 4 hours here that day. 4 solid hours creating legal documents, writing letters, making copies of records Sarah thought no one else had access to. He knew he was dying, but more than that, he knew exactly what Sarah was planning to do to you the moment he was gone. How could he possibly know what she was planning? Tom walked to his window overlooking the parking lot. Gilbert had been watching Sarah very carefully for months. He'd started noticing things. The way she talked about you when she thought he wasn't paying attention, offhand comments about the house and your financial situation, how she'd been systematically limiting your involvement in his medical care. But the final straw was a phone conversation he overheard 2 weeks before he died. What kind of conversation? Sarah was talking to someone, probably her sister, about her detailed plans for after Gilbert died. She was laughing, actually laughing, about how pathetic you were, how you thought you had some legitimate claim on the house, but that you didn't have a legal leg to stand on. She said, and I quote, "I'll give the old woman a few days afterly grieve, then she's gone forever. I never have to see her again. And I can finally live my own life without dealing with his needy, pathetic mother who thinks the world revolves around her precious son." The cruelty of those words, the casual dismissal of everything I'd sacrificed, hit me like a physical blow. Tom returned to his desk and sat down heavily. Gilbert heard every word of that conversation, and that's when he realized everything Sarah had been saying about wanting you to be part of their family was elaborate lies. She'd been manipulating him just as expertly as she'd been manipulating you. Gilbert spent the next 2 weeks secretly documenting everything he could get his hands on. Every financial transaction, every legal agreement, every conversation he could record, every witness statement he could collect. He was building an ironclad legal case against Sarah's claims, but more than that, he was protecting you in ways that wouldn't become apparent until after he was gone. With trembling hands, I opened that envelope. The first document was a handwritten letter from Gilbert, dated exactly 10 days before he died. "My dearest Mom, if you're reading this letter, then Sarah has already shown you exactly who she really is, and I'm so incredibly sorry I couldn't protect you from her cruelty while I was still alive. But I want you to know that I saw through her lies and manipulation long before I died. And I've made absolutely certain she can't steal the life you deserve or the security you've earned. You raised me to be strong, to fight for what's right, and to protect the people I love with everything I have. Even in death, I'm still your son, and I'm still protecting you with every legal tool available to me. What you'll find in this envelope will give you back everything she's tried to take from you, plus the interest and justice you deserve. I love you more than words can express, Mom. Make her pay dearly for underestimating both of us. Your devoted son, Gilbert." Below Gilbert's letter were dozens of legal documents, bank records, witness statements, recorded conversations, and evidence that would systematically destroy every lie Sarah had built her new life on. Gilbert created a superseding ownership agreement that Sarah doesn't know exists. The documents she has are real and legally valid, but they've been completely invalidated by the ones you're holding right now. Tom opened his laptop and showed me audio files. Gilbert secretly recorded several of Sarah's phone conversations over those final 2 weeks. In this first recording, she's talking to her sister about how utterly pathetic you are, how she'd convinced Gilbert that your caregiving was suffocating him, and how she couldn't wait to get rid of you permanently. The recording was crystal clear. Sarah's voice, filled with contempt and cruel amusement. The old woman actually thinks she has rights because she helped with renovations. She has no idea that gratitude has an expiration date. Gilbert's finally starting to see how much his mother interferes with our marriage, how she makes everything about herself instead of letting us grieve privately. In another recording, Sarah discussed her detailed plans for selling the house immediately after Gilbert's death. "I never wanted to live in some depressing family shrine anyway, surrounded by memories of sickness and death. I'll sell the house the moment it's legally mine, take all the money, and start completely fresh somewhere exciting. Maybe California, maybe even Europe. Gilbert's mother can figure out her own life for once instead of depending on us for everything. The file contained comprehensive bank records showing my $180,000 transfer, along with written agreements Sarah had signed acknowledging my investment as a legal partnership, not a gift. Gilbert had insisted on these documents during the renovation, telling Sarah they were purely for tax purposes and legal protection. There were screenshot after screenshot of text messages revealing Sarah's increasing resentment over the months. Messages where she complained bitterly about my presence, systematically tried to convince Gilbert I was interfering with his medical treatment, and repeatedly suggested he needed to set firm boundaries to protect their marriage from my overwhelming involvement. Most damaging were detailed witness statements Gilbert had quietly collected from hospice nurses who could confirm Sarah had repeatedly tried to limit my access to medical information. Neighbors who'd overheard her making disparaging comments about me, and contractors who could verify my substantial financial investment in the property. Tom turned his laptop screen toward me. There's one more thing Gilbert created that I think you need to see. On the screen was a video file dated 6 days before Gilbert's death. When Tom clicked play, I saw my son sitting in this very office, looking weak but completely lucid and determined. If you're watching this recording, then Sarah has already proven everything I suspected about her true character. Mom, I know she's hurt you in ways that cut deeper than any physical pain, but I need you to understand that you are the perfect mother, the perfect caregiver, and the perfect partner in our family. Sarah's betrayal is entirely about her greed, her selfishness, and her complete inability to love anyone more than herself. Gilbert looked directly into the camera with an expression I remembered from his childhood when he was determined to solve a difficult problem. Sarah, if you're watching this, you thought you could manipulate a dying man, steal from a grieving mother, and get away with it because no one would question the young widow's version of events. But I was never as naive or as easily fooled as you assumed. I saw through every lie, documented every cruel comment, and made sure you'll face serious consequences for every terrible thing you planned to do to my mother. Gilbert's voice grew stronger as he continued. The house you think you've inherited belongs half to my mother, who earned that ownership through love, sacrifice, and substantial financial investment. The money you thought you could steal will be returned to her with appropriate interest, and the reputation you've built as a devoted, grieving wife will be permanently destroyed when everyone learns how you really treated the family that welcomed you with open hearts. The video ended with Gilbert looking directly at me through the camera. Mom, I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you while I was alive, but I made absolutely certain I could protect you after I was gone. Make her pay dearly for underestimating what we're capable of when we work together. If you've ever dealt with a manipulative family member who fooled everyone else, smash that subscribe button right now, because this story is going to show you exactly how justice can prevail when good people fight back. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was planning to betray you behind your back? Drop your story in the comments below. The legal summons was delivered to Sarah exactly 1 week after she'd thrown my belongings onto the lawn like garbage. Tom had hired a professional process server to ensure perfect legal protocol. Sarah's reaction was immediate shock, followed by angry, panicked demands about what ridiculous, desperate claims I was making. By 2:45 that afternoon, Sarah was calling Tom's office in barely controlled panic. This is completely impossible. Gilbert didn't leave anything to his mother beyond sentimental items. I have his will, the property deed, every legal document. Whatever she's claiming is pure fantasy born out of grief and desperation. Tom's response was calm and professional. I think we should schedule a formal meeting to discuss the comprehensive legal documents your late husband created during his final weeks. Are you available tomorrow morning at 10? I'd strongly recommend you bring your attorney. What documents? Gilbert was barely coherent toward the end. He couldn't possibly have created anything legally binding or mentally competent. Actually, Mrs. Washington, your husband was completely lucid and fully mentally competent until his final day, as confirmed by medical records and 3 independent witnesses present when he created these documents. Please bring your attorney. This is going to be a substantial discussion. The meeting was held in Tom's conference room the following morning. When Sarah walked in with her expensive attorney, Douglas Keller, the change in her appearance was absolutely startling. Gone was the composed, confident woman from the funeral. Sarah looked like she hadn't slept in days, her usually perfect hair disheveled, her hands visibly shaking. When she saw that thick envelope with Gilbert's handwriting, her face went completely white. "Before we begin," Sarah announced, trying desperately to regain her composure, "I want it clearly on record that this entire situation is caused by Mrs. Henderson's inability to accept that Gilbert legally chose to leave his estate to his wife, as is normal, appropriate, and completely legal." Tom methodically spread the documents across the large conference table. "Your husband did indeed leave his estate to his wife, Mrs. Washington. However, he also thoroughly documented that 50% of your primary asset, the house, legally belonged to his mother due to her substantial financial investment and their detailed co-ownership agreement." Douglas Keller picked up the co-ownership document and examined it carefully with the scrutiny of someone who'd handled thousands of similar cases. After several long minutes, he whispered something to Sarah that made her face go even paler. "This can't possibly be legal or binding. Gilbert never mentioned any co-ownership agreement to me. I would have remembered something that significant." Tom produced comprehensive bank records showing my $180,000 investment alongside signed agreements explicitly acknowledging my partnership status in the property. "Your husband was extremely careful to document everything properly and legally. These agreements bear your signature from the renovation period 2 years ago. I signed those documents because Gilbert told me they were purely for tax purposes and legal protection. I had absolutely no idea they were creating any kind of ownership claims." Douglas Keller studied the documents more thoroughly, his expression growing increasingly grim. "According to property law in this state, your lack of understanding about what you were signing doesn't invalidate the legal documents. These agreements appear completely legitimate and properly notarized." Tom activated his laptop speakers and played the first recording. Sarah's own voice filled the room, discussing her plans to get rid of the old woman and sell the house to start her exciting new life. Sarah's face crumpled as she heard her own cruel words played back. "Gilbert recorded me without my knowledge or consent. That's illegal wiretapping and can't be used as evidence. In this state, one-party consent laws explicitly allow recording conversations when one participant consents. Gilbert consented to recording conversations in his own home with his own equipment." The second recording was even more damaging. Sarah's detailed complaints about me, including her proud admission of systematically manipulating Gilbert's medical team to limit my involvement in his care. Douglas Keller was reading through more documents, his expression increasingly concerned. Finally, he leaned over and whispered urgently to Sarah, who shook her head violently in response. "My client would like to discuss the possibility of reaching a reasonable settlement agreement." "There's one more piece of evidence first," Tom announced, turning on his laptop for Gilbert's video message. As Gilbert's face filled the screen and he began speaking directly about Sarah's deception, her systematic manipulation, and his deliberate legal protections for me, Sarah began crying. When Gilbert looked directly into the camera and addressed Sarah by name, calling out her cruel plans and promising serious consequences, Sarah covered her face and sobbed openly. When the video ended with Gilbert's methodical dismantling of every lie Sarah had told and his promise that she would face justice, the conference room was completely silent except for Sarah's muffled crying. "Your husband saw through your deception completely and comprehensively. He knew exactly what you were planning, and he spent his final weeks ensuring you couldn't possibly succeed." Sarah looked up with tears streaming down her cheeks. For just a moment, I thought I saw genuine remorse in her expression. But when she finally spoke, I realized she was only sorry for herself and her ruined plans. I never meant for things to go this far. I was just scared about my future, about being 31 years old with a dead husband, and I didn't know how to build a life from nothing. So you decided to steal mine. You decided your fear and selfishness justified taking everything from a 72-year-old woman who had just lost her only child. Douglas Keller cleared his throat professionally. My client is prepared to offer a reasonable settlement. She'll agree to sell the house and split the proceeds 50-50, exactly as the co-ownership agreement requires. Absolutely not. That's not what Gilbert wanted, and it's not what's going to happen. Tom produced one final document from Gilbert's collection. Gilbert anticipated that Sarah might try to force a quick sale to avoid ongoing complications. This document gives Mrs. Henderson the legal right of first refusal to buy out Sarah's 50% ownership at fair market value. Keller studied the document carefully and nodded with professional resignation. This appears completely legitimate and legally binding. Mrs. Henderson, you have the option to purchase your daughter-in-law's 50% ownership for approximately $225,000. But I can't possibly afford that amount. Where am I supposed to get $225,000? That's not my problem, Sarah. You were planning to take a house worth $450,000 and leave me with absolutely nothing. Now you'll get exactly what you're legally entitled to, which is half the value of the property I helped purchase. Sarah signed the settlement papers with visibly shaking hands. She had exactly 30 days to vacate the property while I arranged the necessary financing. As she prepared to leave the conference room, she turned back one final time. For whatever it's worth, Gilbert really did love you deeply. He talked about you constantly, especially during those final weeks. I was jealous of how much he loved you, and that jealousy turned into something ugly and cruel. I'm genuinely sorry for what I became. It wasn't nearly enough to undo the cruelty and betrayal, but it was the first honest thing Sarah had said in months. After Sarah left the building, Tom and I sat quietly in his office, both emotionally drained from the confrontation. How are you possibly going to finance the buyout? Do you have access to that kind of money? I smiled and pulled out one final document from Gilbert's envelope, something I hadn't shown Sarah or her attorney during the meeting. It was a life insurance policy Gilbert had secretly taken out 6 months before his death, with me listed as the sole beneficiary. The payout was exactly $225,000. My brilliant son had made absolutely certain I could come home. What's the most satisfying moment of justice you've ever witnessed? Share your story in the comments, because Sarah's downfall was absolutely perfect. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss incredible stories like this one. 3 weeks later, I stood in the driveway of my home, truly my home now, watching the moving truck carry away Sarah's belongings piece by piece. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was the one packing her life into boxes this time, while I watched from the security of the doorway she'd tried to bar me from forever. The life insurance money had come through exactly as Gilbert had planned. $225,000, precisely enough to buy Sarah's half of the house and leave me with a small financial cushion for maintenance and future security. My son had calculated everything with mathematical precision. Sarah was subdued and defeated during the final paperwork signing. Gone completely was the cruel, manipulative woman who had thrown my belongings out and called me pathetic at my son's funeral. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the realization that Gilbert had seen through her completely. The house really is beautiful, Margaret. I hope you'll be genuinely happy here. That first night back home, I walked through every single room, remembering better times, grieving properly for the first time since Gilbert's death. But it was Gilbert's study that held the biggest surprise of all. In his desk drawer, carefully placed where I'd be sure to find it, was another letter marked for Mom, after everything is settled. My dearest Mom, if you're reading this letter, then my plan worked perfectly, and you're back home where you absolutely belong. I'm so sorry I had to deceive you about what I was doing during those final weeks. I desperately wanted to tell you about Sarah's true nature and her cruel plans, but I knew it would break your heart when you were already dealing with losing me. I need you to understand something crucial. Not one single word Sarah said about me feeling suffocated or overwhelmed was true. You were the absolute best part of my life, especially during my illness. Your constant care wasn't overwhelming or suffocating. It was the greatest gift anyone could receive, and it made dying bearable because I knew I was deeply loved. I saw what Sarah was becoming, and I realized her resentment of you was really resentment of the kind of unconditional love she'd never learned to give or receive. She loved me conditionally when I was healthy and successful and focused entirely on making her happy. When I got sick and needed you more than ever, her love couldn't stretch to include real sacrifice. But you loved me exactly the same when I was dying as you did when I was born. You never wavered, never complained, never made my illness about your own suffering. That's the kind of love that deserves protection, and that's exactly why I spent my final weeks making sure Sarah couldn't destroy you. Live fully in this house, Mom. Fill it with whatever makes you genuinely happy. Plant that extensive garden you always talked about creating. Invite friends over regularly. Make it the warm, welcoming home you deserve to have. And someday, when you're ready, I hope you'll find it in your heart to forgive Sarah. Not because she deserves forgiveness, but because you deserve to be completely free from anger and bitterness. She's broken in ways she doesn't even understand, and she broke herself even more by trying to break you. You're infinitely stronger than she ever imagined, and now you have the rest of your life to prove it. Thank you for raising me to be the kind of man who fights fiercely for the people he loves, even when fighting is all that's left to do. Your eternally devoted son, Gilbert. Over the following months, I transformed that house into exactly what Gilbert had envisioned for me. I planted an extensive garden with vegetables and flowers that filled the entire backyard with color and life. I joined a book club at the local library, started volunteering at the elementary school where I'd taught for 30 years, and slowly rebuilt the social connections I'd let fade during Gilbert's illness. The guest cottage became my art studio. I'd always loved painting but never had the time or space to pursue it seriously. Now I spent peaceful hours creating watercolor landscapes, finding genuine healing in artistic creation. 6 months later, Tom visited with news about Sarah's new life. She moved to Portland, Oregon, working for a small marketing firm, living in a tiny studio apartment. She'd asked her attorney about appealing the settlement, but when she saw the comprehensive strength of Gilbert's documentation, she realized it was completely hopeless. How is she doing? I mean, really doing? Struggling significantly, from what I understand, but maybe that's exactly what she needs. Gilbert was right when he said she'd never learn to love unconditionally. Maybe losing everything she thought she wanted will finally teach her what actually matters in life. I nodded thoughtfully, remembering Gilbert's letter and his hope that I'd eventually forgive Sarah. I wasn't completely there yet, but I was no longer consumed by anger or bitterness. Justice had been thoroughly served, my life had been restored, and carrying hatred would only diminish the peace Gilbert had died to give me. A full year after Gilbert's death, on the anniversary of his funeral, I drove to his grave and told him about the beautiful life I was building with the solid foundation he'd given me. Your plan worked absolutely perfectly, sweetheart. The house is filled with love and laughter again. The garden is thriving beyond my wildest dreams, and I'm painting again for the first time in decades. You saved me completely, in every way a son can save his mother. I also told Gilbert about Sarah, about the small part of me that was beginning to hope she'd eventually find whatever she'd been desperately searching for when she tried to steal my life and security. You were absolutely right about forgiveness being for me, not for her. I'm working on it every single day. But most importantly, I told Gilbert how incredibly proud I was to be his mother. Not just for the wonderful man he'd been in life, but for how brilliantly and thoroughly he'd protected me in death. You taught me that real love doesn't end with death. It just transforms into different forms of protection and care. Your love became legal documents and insurance policies and careful plans that gave me back my entire life. The most beautiful part of this whole story is that Gilbert's love reached beyond the grave to ensure justice prevailed. Sometimes the people we love most are protecting us in ways we can't even imagine. Working behind the scenes to make sure we're safe and secure. If this story of ultimate justice and a son's devotion restored your faith that good people can triumph over manipulation, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you never miss stories like this one. Share in the comments your thoughts on Gilbert's brilliant plan and let me know where you're watching from. The real lesson here isn't about revenge or getting even. It's about the power of unconditional love, the importance of documenting everything when dealing with manipulative people, and the fact that justice sometimes takes time, but it always finds its way. Gilbert taught me that the strongest people aren't those who never get knocked down. They're the ones who get back up, dust themselves off, and build something better from the pieces of what was broken. Sometimes you have to go through absolute hell to get to your heaven. And sometimes, just sometimes, heaven is exactly where you end up. Today, I'm 73 years old, and I wake up every morning in a house filled with sunlight, surrounded by a garden that blooms with life, creating art that brings me joy, and knowing that my son's love protected me even after he was gone. Sarah took away my security temporarily, but Gilbert gave me back my dignity permanently. The house that was supposed to be stolen from me is now completely mine. The money that was supposed to disappear is now earning interest in my account. The woman who called me pathetic discovered that underestimating a mother's love and a son's devotion was the biggest mistake of her life. And every single morning when I wake up in my beautiful home, I whisper, "Thank you, Gilbert," to the ceiling. Because even in death, my son kept his promise to always protect his mother. That's what real love looks like. That's what justice feels like. And that's why you should never, ever underestimate the power of family who truly loves you, because their protection doesn't end when their heartbeat stops. Remember, the best revenge isn't elaborate schemes or cruel payback. The best revenge is living well, loving deeply, and proving that you're stronger than anyone who tried to break you. Thanks for watching, and remember, never underestimate the power of a mother's love or a son's devotion. Sometimes the people we love most are protecting us from the shadows, even after they're gone. Thanks for watching, and remember, you're stronger than anyone who's ever tried to break you. The people who love you will stand by you through the darkness, and the ones who don't weren't worth your light anyway. If this story resonated with you, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell so you never miss these real-life stories of triumph. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and share your own story if you're comfortable. This community is here for you. Until next time, keep fighting for the life you deserve.